The following program is a UWTV classic.
From the University of Washington in Seattle, Upon Reflection with Al Page. Our guest is author Tom Wolfe.
As a writer, do you have to care about your subject before you can really portray the dark side of your subject?
I think you have to care about it in the sense of being interested.
What does that mean, be interested?
You have to find something significant and something worth discovering for readers. I don't think you have to care about your subjects in the sense of liking them.
When you look at a character like Reverend Bacon, do you ever say life is absurd? There's a sense of absurdity in all of us.
I don't think of so much absurd as bizarre. I think this is a very bizarre period we're in, partly because of the amount of money that is in the air. It's almost as if it's so thick you can reach up and some of it will stick to your fingers. And someone like Reverend Bacon, who after all is a minister who gets money for organizations he has set up by appealing either to the guilt or the fear of people of means who are worried that the Reverend Bacon's constituency, or what he claims is his constituency, which is in the book, it's mainly the people of Harlem, will make them give him money. This sort of operation, or this sort of figure, only succeeds in good times. If times get hard enough, I think it would be amazing how fast people's guilt will recede, and the kind of guilt that makes them give money to such causes.
Why only in good times? What's unique about good times?
There's money to play with. I think people will do a lot to relieve their guilty consciences, but they'll only give money when it's sort of the part of the fat that they're living off. So many things that are going on. For example, the high level of street crime in New York and other cities. Sociologists have known ever since the Depression that aggressive street crime, which is mainly robbery, muggings, go up not in bad times when you'd think that the poor need money, but in good times. And because it is in good times that the poor, like the rich, are inflamed by the money fever. For example, when I was doing research for the Bonfire of the Vanities and going up to the Bronx, I can't tell you how many boys I saw in housing projects wearing Mercedes-Benz hood ornaments around their necks on chains.
What does this mean to them?
Well, it meant that the money fever had reached to every level of the population. These boys knew what a Mercedes costs, and they knew that hotshots on Wall Street and also pimps drove Mercedes, and they wanted some for themselves, and so far they were taking the only thing they could get, which was the hood ornaments, which they would break off and put and wear around their necks.
You've seen a lot of different environments, a lot of different slices of life: Richmond, Virginia, Washington and Lee, Yale, New York, New York. Do you sometimes feel that you're always an outsider, you never quite fit in, you're always looking from the outside in through your writing?
Well, when I'm writing, when I'm doing reporting, which I consider to be the necessary basis of all good writing, whether it's going to be for nonfiction, fiction, plays, or movies, I usually feel like a man from Mars who has come to gather information. At the very outset, I used to try to fit in to the scene I was writing about.
So you dress for the scene and use certain mannerisms.
Right. One of the first magazine pieces I did was on a Southern stock car racer named Junior Johnson. I just started doing magazine pieces, and so I went down to Wilkes County, North Carolina, and I decided, well, I'll dress for the stock car circuit. So I wore a green tweed suit and a blue button-down shirt and a black knit tie and a pair of brown suede shoes and a brown Borsalino hat.
Did you look good?
Well, I thought I looked casual, ready for the races. Well, after about 5 days, Junior Johnson came up to me and he says, I don't mean to say anything, but all these people here in Ingle Hollow, where I've grown up and lived all my life, they keep saying to me, Junior, who's that strange little green man following you around? And then it dawned on me that I was the only person, probably in a 50-mile radius, who was wearing a suit and a tie, much less a brown Borsalino hat, and the less said about brown suede shoes in Ingle Hollow, the better. So two things I discovered. One was, it was no use my trying to fit in these situations anyway. And second, if you're a reporter and you are acting as if you belong to the scene that you're writing about, you deprive yourself of the ability to ask very open, naive, but necessary questions. For example, I was dying to learn what an overhead cam was. Everybody was talking about overhead cams, but if you're supposedly part of the scene, well, you don't ask basic questions like that.
So you need a little distance.
Need a little distance. When I did the electric Kool-Aid acid test about Ken Kesey, the Merry Pranksters, the whole psychedelic or hippie scene, I always wore a suit, vest, and most days a blue corduroy necktie, but it was a necktie.
At least they could identify who you were.
Well, and it might surprise you, or maybe it wouldn't, to see how many people will, once they know that you are there as the village information gatherer, how many people will come to you and volunteer information.
When you're working with somebody like Junior or Ken Kesey, how do you know that you're mirroring their little world as opposed to simply writing about your little world through their eyes?
I suppose there's no way to keep your own experience out of it. But I think if it means enough to you as a writer to bring alive somebody else's world, if that is, you feel is your mission, if this kind of discovery is what you really want to do, then you're not so likely to impose your values and outlook on what you write. I think what the biggest trap of ideological commitment for a writer is exactly that. If you approach what you write ideologically, you tend to feel, well, you know the answer already. So why work so hard to get information if you already know how it comes out?
Do you have to respect your subject, value your subject, keep your personal opinion about your subject out of your writing?
I don't think you have to respect your subject, but I think you have to value the subject's significance, and you have to think it's important to bring this information to readers, and you have to feel that your ability in bringing this to readers is more important than any issue that might be involved. And in that way lies some objectivity, a kind of egocentric objectivity. Nevertheless, objectivity. And most writers would disagree with me. Most writers that I know want to feel committed about a subject. They either want to have great respect for an individual or for the cause the individual represents. George Orwell, whom I admire tremendously, said that he never wrote a decent word that wasn't inspired by political commitment.
That's very interesting. You have a sense of reality, you want to get it to the printed page. Is there a temptation to use tricks to attract the reader that might in fact distort that reality?
There certainly is a temptation to use tricks that will attract the reader. For example, when I was writing for Sunday supplements, and that's how I began, I was very much aware of the fact that Sunday supplements were brain candy, that people threw them away without any compunction whatsoever. At least with a big, slick magazine, you tend to stack it. You may not read it, but you'll stack it up for 6 months before you start throwing them away. Sunday supplement, you just throw it away with a second thought. So I used all kinds of tricks. I began one story by repeating the word hernia 57 times. And I actually counted the number I got the layout from the art director, I counted the number of characters of type that would appear on the first page of the article. And so I repeated the word hernia until I knew you had to turn the page to find out where this succession of hernias was leading us. I knew anybody would. I knew that no one's curiosity could resist finding out where this parade of hernias went. At the same time, I don't think it distorted anything. To me, that had been the sound of the story was about Las Vegas, and that was the sound of the croupiers in Las Vegas. And they would actually be saying, they'd probably be saying something, "I am place your bets, and now that's a turn ready to roll, fade on 3, and whatever they say. But to me, it always sounded like a hernia, 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 hernia. And so I repeated this word as a kind of onomatopoeia of the chant of the croupier in a Las Vegas casino, and I think it worked. On another occasion, I started off a story by yelling at the main character. Usually, at that time, this goes back to the 60s, articles were written in a very deadpan, objective fashion, and there was a kind of neutral voice that all writers adopted in writing nonfiction.
How do you yell at a character?
Well, I began this particular story with the character's name, Harry, only I made it Harry, and the A's and I's and R's and E's went on for 4 or 5 lines, and then I said, "Yes, you with those wide whale corduroy pants that you ordered by mail through the Manchester Guardian airmail edition. Yes, you with that bulky knit Norwegian weave sweater that you think is going to impress beautiful young buds in Greenwich Village." And I started hectoring this character. His name was Harry. And I had heard his name yelled, as in the Harry of the first, from a prison window in Greenwich Village. The Women's House of Detention used to be right in the middle of Greenwich Village, and the girls, most of them were just girls, inside the jail would yell boys' names out the window until they finally found a boy who fit the name. They would yell every name that came into their minds. That was another way of simply grabbing the attention of the reader.
So you can play with words like a juggler might juggle balls.
In writing for a Sunday supplement, I didn't hesitate to do that. Now, some of these experiments work and some of them don't. They were not done for any very high-minded reason, but I think they led to they led to techniques that were really quite valid. And I would emphasize that it was the low-rent status of the Sunday supplement, the fact that Sunday supplements had no standards, no one cared about them, no one had rules for them, that encouraged experiment.
One New York Times book reviewer accused you of having the tendency of embracing the grotesque. In fact, is our behavior grotesque and we just don't recognize it?
I would not agree with the word grotesque. I would use a somewhat more neutral word, bizarre. Grotesque implies, to me, something a bit evil.
Bizarre is colorful?
Or twisted. Whereas bizarre is simply, it's baffling and colorful, at least to the way I think of those two words. And this particular age of the money fever, for example, has led to what I look upon as bizarre scenes on Wall Street. The rapidly changing ethnic composition of cities leads to bizarre mixes of people in the cities and so on. I think that's just what's out there. As to whether one considers it twisted and grotesque is another matter.
I want to turn the subject to communication between the races. How can a universal writer deal with the fact that each special racial group uses some special language to communicate? Is this a problem for you when you approach your own writing?
It's a problem of reporting. It just means I think you have to work harder as a reporter. You know, Philip Roth said in the 1960s, when he was the hottest young novelist in the United States, that the imagination of the novelist is helpless before what he knows he's going to read in tomorrow morning's newspaper. And this was a kind of the obverse of something that literary critics such as Lionel Trilling and George Steiner had been saying, which was that we live in a bizarre age, we live in a chaotic age, and we live in an age, and this is their terminology, in which the old social order of the industrial bourgeoisie is disintegrating. Their theory was that the industrial bourgeoisie had spawned the novel, that the novel was kind of a child of this 19th century industrial upper middle class social order.
Do you tie into that theory? Do you believe it?
I find that the theory total nonsense, frankly, because they drew the conclusion that that now that the industrial bourgeoisie is disintegrating as a social class, its child, the realistic novel, is dead, and if you try to do a realistic novel, you will be getting a slice of chaos instead of a slice of a whole society. You'll get a slice of chaos. I think the theory is wrong from beginning to end.
How can you incorporate an ethnic style into your work without being accused of creating or responding to stereotypes?
Well, people are going to use two words. Whenever you bring up the subject of racial hostility, ethnic hostility, which I think you have to do if you're going to write an honest novel of the city today, these two words are going to be thrown in your face: racist and stereotype. I reject both characterizations. For example, I mentioned at the outset the figure of Reverend Bacon. I have, in one review, although the review was favorable, the review referred to him as a stereotypical figure. A stereotype is a type that has been used so often that a kind of piece of metal exists to just put it right on the page anytime you need it.
Like an ink stamp.
In fact, I've never seen this type of activist portrayed in print anywhere. I don't know of a single place. So how can it be called, if it's only been done once, how can it be called a stereotype? I think that's kind of a defensive accusation.
If Dickens were resurrected and wrote about New York today, would he be accused of the same thing?
Well, I couldn't say in the case of Dickens, but I could say in the case of Zola. Zola wrote a novel called L'Assommoir, which was a study of the Paris slums. Now, Zola was a great liberal of his day. After all, he was one of the organizers and signers of the Dreyfus Manifesto, which was that manifesto introduced the word intellectuals into our language in the modern sense. It's a manifesto of the intellectuals. But his picture of the people of the slums was so unsparing in its depiction of their selfishness, their pettiness, their stupidity, their impulsiveness, that he was denounced as a reactionary. I mean, Zola, a reactionary. In fact, he was merely presenting what he saw, and what anybody who did the kind of reporting that he did for L'Assommoir would have
if you're an honest
would have
writer.
seen. He was writing it serially, incidentally. He wrote practically everything he ever wrote, he did serially for magazines. And the magazine was under such pressure from what we would now call intellectuals, denouncing this portrait of the proletariat, that they suspended publication and announced quite falsely that Zola had taken ill and was unable to continue the. This is the kind of intellectual pressure that we've seen in our own day, and it hasn't come against me, but
Yet.
we've seen yet, because I've been out of town.
Well, Henry's views of New York are now considered passé, but I suspect that you probably like O. Henry.
Oh, I enjoy O. Henry. O. Henry is today, by contemporary taste, considered awfully sentimental, but I have a feeling that sentiment is going to be coming back in literature by the end of the century, which is not that far away, of course. Their coolness has been such a fashion in literature ever since the 50s, I would say, that I think it will exhaust itself. And curiously, part of it will come due to the end, which is probably looming, of the so-called sexual revolution, which will probably be stopped dead in its tracks by AIDS. And once the sexual revolution has come to a halt, we will start reading more about love and about sentiment.
Are you suggesting that romance is a substitute for sex?
Well, romance has always been an elaborate dance. It's always sentiment, an elaborate prelude to sex. And if you, then when you reach the period where in the marvelous parody of Francois Sagan, that it said, our eyes met, our lips met, our bodies met, and then we were introduced. I mean, we've been in that
era.
We've been in that period, and there's no time. You know, if you hit a home run immediately, you don't need to do a lot of fancy romantic footwork on the base paths.
So you're suggesting dancing may even come back?
Dancing is part of the romantic courtship. Actually, this is a very good point. Look at the way dances are done now. It used to be very much a dancing, the foxtrot, which preceded the various forms of rock dancing, the twist and the rest of them. The foxtrot was a very courtly form of dance, as is the mambo, curiously enough, which was part of the general elaborate dancing around the subject of sex. Today, it's all the writhing of the hips is what. That's all the dancing is about. You know, the prelude's very short.
As you have aged and seen slice after slice of life, has your tolerance for the vagaries of human nature increased or decreased?
I think I've always been pretty tolerant of the vagaries of the human of the human beast. Actually, that's another Zola title, as a matter of fact, La Bête Humaine. I think I've been tolerant, because I may be fooling myself. When I chose the title, The Bonfire of the Vanities, I, in fact, I was choosing a title that summons up an image of the most fierce moralist who ever lived, Savonarola, the priest who ran Florence for about 3 years, and who actually used to organize bonfires of the vanities. He would send his Red Guard units, his zealous religious youth, into people's homes and drag out their vanities, which was anything from false eyelashes to non-religious portraits, and he would actually build pyramids in the Piazza della Signoria and burn them. Well, the citizenry finally had about enough of this, and on the last of the bonfires of the vanities, they tossed literally threw Savonarola on top, and he perished in the flames. Perhaps subconsciously in me somewhere lurks a moralist, and which would make me, if the analogy is correct, Savonarola, wouldn't it? It's not a very happy prospect.
You've produced lots of books and lots of articles, and you've also produced a couple of kids. Which will be your most important legacy, your books and articles or your kids?
Oh, boy. Well, that's easy.
It's easy superficially, but a bit harder if you address your guts.
It would be, there's no question it'll be my children, in my estimation, because it's a little hard to, it's hard to predict the course of human lives, even if you've had a hand in bringing them into the world. But I think so much of my children. I hate to even draw up, compare them to literary works.
How are you going to teach them to approach the human beast when they become adults? What are you going to tell them?
Well, I'm going to tell them that a motto that I finally, rather late in life, put on the wall of my study, which is say no now. A lot of us want to say no to a lot of things, and we put off saying no in order to not be a bad guy, or to not to be unpopular. And saying no now is another way of saying you know your own values, you know what you stand for, and I think anyone who knows himself, and I'm merely imperfectly quoting Emerson, knows much of the secret of happiness.
Author Tom Wolfe, Upon Reflection.
To see more UWTV classics, visit uwtv.org/classics.